Hello and welcome to Climate Science Meets Climate Science Fiction, a conversation between a climate scientist and a science fiction writer. And we want to find out whether and how literary fiction can help us find ways out of the climate crisis. Have scientists, for instance, failed to tell the story? How can scientific research motivate people to act better? How much science is good for science fiction? And how do researchers feel when they find that their findings have been turned into the plot of some dystopian novel or even utopian novel? This is a virtual yet very real event, and it's brought to you by Klimakrise, a German language online magazine and resource for climate communication, in cooperation with the German public broadcaster DW, Deutsche Welle, and the UK weekly, The New Statesman. I'm Zulfikar Bani, a senior science editor at DW, and I'll be prodding our two very cool speakers to reveal all. Now, I won't spend too much time on introductions, but we do have Friederike, Fredi, Otto, an associate director of the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford, and also an associate professor in the Global Climate Science Programme and author of the book Angry Weather. We also have Kim Stanley Robinson, Stan Robinson, a utopian science fiction writer, some might say climate fiction writer, but let's not go there. I've been warned against that topic. Stan is the author of 3 trilogies, 12 other novels, including his most recent, The Ministry for the Future, and non-fiction as well. Fredi, Otto, and Stan Robinson, welcome to you both. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good
Excellent
to be with
stuff. Good to have you here. Now, you've both been busy reading each other's work, and Fredi, I want to pick up on the idea of seeing your real work in a fictional work. How does it make you feel? What have you been thinking about, or what did you think while reading The Ministry for the Future?
I think, to be honest, my main thought was that, at least at the beginning, that this is very close to home, a bit too close to home to really feel like fiction, because of course, a lot of the science is not. It might be a little bit exaggerated, but really not much, if at all. And so it's all things that have been talked about, that have been published about in the science literature. The institutions are institutions I'm dealing with all the time. And I think in particular, the main character, who is the leader of the Ministry for the Future, often feels really as if she doesn't have any skills or any useful skills, or it's very powerless. And I think that that these institutions, UN institutions, working with them and trying to be part of that often feels like that. So I think that was very close to home. But I think towards the end, it's not a dystopian book, it's a utopian book. So it would be fantastic if we would get somewhere where that book get very soon.
And Stan, Fredi's Angry Weather plots the story of the very real Hurricane Harvey of 2017. What was it like for you? Was it a page turner? Would you have liked a few more fictional twists?
No, not more fictional twists. It's interesting enough as it is, and we need reports from the cutting edge of what the sciences are doing right now, which is what Angry Weather is about. And I'm very interested in the scientific institutions, and they're a hard topic for a fiction writer because they're diffuse and they have to do with group work, whereas fiction usually concentrates on characters. So in Fredi's book, she describes somewhat the invention and deployment of world weather attribution. In other words, applying scientific methods to being able to say definitively the wild weather that's happening, that has always happened throughout human history and Earth history, how much of it is the result of climate change adding heat to the global system. And can you say that definitively? And one aspect I found very fascinating in Fredi's book is that you would want to be able to do this faster than the ordinary scientific method, which has to go through peer review, and usually results that have been certified by peer review come out a year or two after the studies have been done. It's a very meticulous and slow group process. Could that process be hacked and still be solid scientifically, just speed it up as a kind of real-time reporting to the world? And so that is what her book describes in a really interesting way, and trying to make science more immediately useful in the political battle to get people to react to climate change. So no, I mean, really, fictional scenes or speculative scenes would have been out of place there.
You just sort of like immediately put your finger on something, turning this story, whether it's a fictional or a non-fictional story, this story that we're all living now, this very real story, you can't look at that without the politics. And in a sense, both of you are having to walk a very fine line, aren't you? I mean, Stan, as a fiction writer, you are having to speak to people who do maybe want to have a bit of real stuff in their lives, but also have their imaginations tested and challenged and look towards a different kind of world. You offer a very positive outcome in your novel. And Fredi, you have to sort of like, stick to the facts to be believable. How do you walk that line? I mean, would you sort of like hope for a little bit more fiction? Could you be able to like say, build in like a fictional character? So it's not me who's saying this political thing, that is voicing this opinion about climate science. It's my alter ego or something like that. And Stan, you can say, look, actually, this is really real. what I'm writing. It's not just fiction. I mean, how do you work with that balancing trick? Fredi, perhaps?
I don't think that I wish I would be an alter ego or that it wasn't me who's using the facts and using the science, but I think what you also have to do to make science useful and is to tell it within a narrative. So you need to find the way of how what you can say from a scientific point of view and how that meets the questions that decision makers, policy are actually having. And I think that's quite a difficult thing to achieve, because it's on the one hand, most decisions are made on a very small scale, very locally. You have very limited areas of where you can actually make decisions, whereas climate change is of course a global problem, and so you have to find the way to translate it to somewhere where these decisions can actually be made, and that is difficult.
I'm sure it is very difficult, but also you said making it useful. No offense, but very few people, apart from those who have to, in a sense, read the IPCC reports, and yet the politicians who will be making political decisions based on that will be in direct conversation with their electorates, won't they? And so if there's no resonance there, how do you make it useful? Is it through novels and films or radio dramas or what have you, that you can really show it to people? I mean, are people feeling it really now at the pump? Do they make connections? What are they thinking?
The way I'm trying to do it is, and that's why I'm doing the kind of science that I'm doing, is when we are experiencing extreme weather events or weather, it really is something that we experience, and especially when it's an extreme weather event that hits a vulnerable community, then that turns weather into a catastrophe or into something that you have to immediately deal with. And when you then can bring in the role of climate change in this weather event, then it connects something really abstract with your direct experience. So, and I think it does. I think we have achieved to change, at least in part, the conversation we have about weather and climate change. I think there is still quite some way to go to actually lead to action, but I think it's an important first step.
I mean, Stan, I mean, you've told us, we've been chatting for a while now, a couple of weeks now. The three of us, that you go trekking in the Sierra Nevada and that, and do you ever feel frustrated when you see this landscape and even your work? You're in the mainstream, but science fiction is still a sort of a, well, I haven't looked at the figures really. I shouldn't say something that's going to get me a virtual fist through the screen here, but it's a bit of a niche, isn't it? I mean, we're not talking about rom-coms, are we? In terms of sales. Do you feel a sense of frustration, or do we? Do we see? I mean, do you think? I mean, I know that films are blockbusters in this area. Do you feel a frustration when you write these? You invest all this time. You're so close to the science yourself, personally and through your work, and you go out into a vast landscape and you see what's going on, but you realize that there's so little action. How does it make you feel?
Well, it's a process, and actually there's been an immense amount of progress since I began writing about climate change around 2002. So it's never good to tell the narrative as if things aren't changing, because they're changing quite quickly, especially given the trajectory and the inertia of civilization at large. Climate change is now the obvious overriding story of the 21st century. And that wasn't true 20 years ago. And so this is an accomplishment of the scientific community. And Fredi's part of a giant collaborative project of her entire generation of climatologists and scientists in general, environmental scientists. Climate change itself is something no individual human can register or be aware of. It's a scientific fact. It's you have to see all the data, run it back through history, process it, and then come to conclusions that no individual could have figured out on their own. So in this sense, and the fact that it's taken over today's history and become the overriding concern is an achievement of the scientific community of doing outreach. And I believe that in 1998 or so, when scientists raised their hand and said, uh-oh, we're torching the planet, and they were generally, society went on as if they hadn't spoken at all, when the entire civilization depends on scientific achievements just to keep people fed and housed. This was a shock to the scientific community. And since then, they've been trying to figure out ways to get their message effectively heard and turned into action, political change, so that we don't torch the planet. So of course, I'm frustrated. I mean, science fiction, to speak of my particular project, 10 of the 15 most popular movies of all time are science fiction movies. And rom-coms are an escape for middle-class citizens who are worried about reality. Science fiction is reality slapping you in the face. And so it's not niche at all. It's the realism of our time. And this is becoming more and more true as we enter into the climate change era, and people are more and more aware of it. So I'm quite pleased at the growing prominence of science fiction as a literary genre, and it's already been that way in movies for a long time. So what frustration? Well, I mean, I'm in the United States. It's frustrating that so many fellow citizens are so intent to hide themselves from the facts of the situation. That's sad, but it might not be crucial. It depends on getting a working political majority and pushing through necessary legislation. So of course, there's reasons to be scared. And here's where better outreach, better connection, and something that you asked earlier to Fredi, I wanted to say, the project of scientists like Fredi is not just outreach to the general public, but convincing their representatives, the policymakers, to make changes at that level. And their facts, figures, numbers that you can point to, connections that are obvious. You would hope that you can go to the level of the decision makers and the policymakers and the legislators that are representatives of their peoples. So it's it's a united front, or it's a very broad front, and you can put in your efforts in different parts of that broad front.
I'm starting to see the horror of all debates, that we're going to reach a consensus here. So
I'm not actually sure, though, that the scientists have changed the discourse. I think what has really changed or led to the huge change that has happened in the last, well, I think it was only really 2 or 3 years, is to a large degree the Fridays for Futures movement, the people who are not the scientists going to the street and saying, listen to the science. But I don't think at all that it has been the scientists. I think some of us have tried, and I think some of us have also achieved to be heard and heard in different ways. But I don't think we would have gotten anywhere near where we are now if it would not have been for that movement. And I don't know, and I think you probably know better than I do of why that managed to become such a global and big movement now, and why it wasn't the case before. Because as you said, the science is not, well, of course there's always new stuff. The basic facts have been known for a very long time.
I wonder if to speak to that, I wonder if a certain coalescing has happened between environmentalists and leftists, such that you get a united front, where it used to be that leftists in America and I think elsewhere regarded the human problem as overriding, and the environment was kind of a luxury concern of the developed world and middle-class citizens. It was a bourgeois luxury to think about the environment. And so leftists and environmentalists were at odds. I mean, I'm talking perhaps decades back, but I've seen that for a long time. And as a leftist environmentalist, this always worried me. Now I think what happened is that the anti-capitalist forces, the young left, has realized that one of the many things that capitalism does to hurt us, not just people, but planet, and the planet is our life support system. So now it's become more and more obvious that concern with the environment is also a concern for people. And that means that you get mass action, you get demonstrations in the street, you get Extinction Rebellion. And these movements are more active in Europe than they are in America, but they're not non-existent in America.
Can I jump in there just for a second? Because we've had a comment from our, or a couple of comments from our audience, and I wanted to just like shout out to people. Please do put your comments in the stream as you're watching, because we're here for you as well. I should have said that at the top. It's very remiss of me. We're here for you, the audience. So please let us know what you're thinking. And if I could just jump in here, because I've been listening to what you're saying, and I know there are studies into how science fiction affects society on a real level. You know, whichever ways it is, whether it's climate change or robotics, AI, and what have you. We do have a question here, and I'm just going to read it out straight out. How do you relate to a novel such as Gregory Benford's 1980 novel Timescape, which accurately described and predicted how slow society reacts to global warming, even when proved? I don't know who that's from, unfortunately. But that's a question. Do you relate to that? How do you relate to that?
Well, I haven't read the novel, so I have to out myself here. But I think one of the reasons why society is reacting so slowly to global warming is that there were very powerful and very active, well, as Naomi Oreskes says, merchants of doubt. So it's not a necessity or a human nature that the science of climate change particularly has been discredited and disbelieved, but that was very active, the fossil fuel industry seeing doubt and discrediting the science and scientists. And so that's not, and I don't know if the novel described that happening or if it was for other reasons that society is slow. So I think we know very well what has happened there and why it has happened. So we just need to learn the lessons a bit more quickly.
Stan, I'd like to hear your response to that, but I will just say it's that question was from Justin Case in Denmark. So thank you very much, Justin. Over to you, Stan.
Timescape is Gregory Benford's best novel. It's quite a beautiful novel. He's a professor of physics, and he knows how university departments work, and his novel is a time travel novel. So what it gives you is this notion that you could have different futures depending on what you do now, which is the general value of time travel. It's not a climate change novel, but many a science fiction writer in projecting a future half a century out would just include climate change because it's been obvious for more than half a century that that's coming. So I think that this was, tangential to Timescape and to a lot of science fiction of that time, which had other stories to tell, which is fine. What's happened, I think, recently, and with the invention of climate fiction, which I think is a good name and a real name for a certain thing, which is that all near future science fiction needs to include climate change because it's an overriding reality. So that's why we have this term climate fiction, is that near future science fiction has been overwhelmed by the reality of the near future going to be warmer, and things are going to be affected by that.
Just as this next comment finishes typing, I will say, you mentioned sort of the climate doubt that was seeded and commercial interests. And I wonder if I can sort of play the other side of the devil's advocate, that maybe now there is more action because people see a opportunity in joining the movement, but also a threat to their capitalist lives if they do not act now. Is that a real idea? I mean, some people say it.
Oh yeah, so I think it's definitely that people react now is because, you must be very delusional to sort of not see that climate change is happening here and now, and the era of loss and damage has long started, and we realize that, and of course that means that if you are people realize that it is the end of the fossil era, but I still think that we could have, if we as a society had wanted, and if we did not have to fight all this misinformation and disinformation, that could have happened a lot earlier.
Stan, you're just going to nod?
Well, I'm thinking that Fredi brought up Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway. That's important work. Merchants of Doubt revealed the deliberate misinformation campaign of the fossil fuels industry, but also tied it back to the tobacco industry's deliberate misinformation about the cancer dangers of cigarettes. And this was a great connection to make. And it wasn't just an analogy, it was actually the same disinformation methods and people doing it, and sources of money. So at this point, the project of sowing doubt has been dismantled and is essentially, as Michael Mann has pointed out in his most recent book, they've moved on to the next point in their campaign, which is to suggest that it's too late. Nothing can be done about it anyway. We're doomed. Let's just go on. And so they've had to give up on doubt because there's no doubt left, and gone on to, well, let's just do nothing anyway.
Well, let's not do nothing anyway. I'm sorry for pointing my finger. I shouldn't point my finger wagging like this. Very rude of me, but hey, that's me. Build a career on it. Solutions. I want to ask you, who thinks bigger now? Do you both think bigger, as big as each other? Can your minds come together and bring us solutions? What do you think is a viable solution? Stan, your book, The Ministry for the Future, dives right deep into geoengineering. Can you explain to us why? Why did you place that in your novel, and what are the solutions in it, as far as you see, or not, or the ones that you wanted to discuss at least?
Well, this is to open a can of worms that takes some time to unpack, and I'll try to be brief. Geoengineering is too big of a term. For a lot of people, it means silver bullet solutions that capitalists are trying to introduce so they can keep doing the bad things they're doing, keep burning carbon and get away with it. Well, defined as such, it's bad. On the other hand, if we begin to have mass heat death incidents, there are some scientists suggesting that we know how to cool down the planet for 5 years at a time by imitating a volcanic eruption. So this one's very famous, solar radiation management. And it's very controversial because there will be side effects. And I really don't want to get into the minutiae of it. But there are other things that are being called geoengineering, pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere by mechanical or natural means. That seems uncontroversial and maybe necessary. And then, I don't know, peculiar things, drawing water out from under the glaciers to slow them back down. That's in my novel. That's been proposed. There's a paper in Nature that quantifies it. It would use oil industry technology to do it. It's a known thing, seems to have no downside. Some of the older suggestions look like they're too dangerous.
Seems to have no downside, or does it have a downside?
No, well, I can't even imagine a downside. If you pull fresh water out from underneath a glacier and it freezes on top and it slows the glacier down to its speed of a century ago, no, there is no downside. On the other hand, throwing carbon dust into the ocean and causing a plankton bloom that would then sink to the bottom seems like it's filled with downsides. And I think to get to maybe the major point of contention where you get climatologists like Fredi involved is, if you were to imitate a volcanic eruption, would it disrupt the monsoon in South Asia so badly as to be worse, the effect, the cure worse than the disease? And so this is an object of study that outsiders can't make a judgment on. And indeed, the modeling is so difficult that maybe we won't know. It's hard to say. I'd like to know what Fredi thinks about that.
Fredi.
Well, I think well, we know that aerosol pollution and that particles in the atmosphere, that does affect the monsoon circulation. That's one of the key findings of the most recent IPCC report. What is really very difficult to know and to model, as Stan was saying, because you have to do it with a climate model. You don't have a real life experiment for that. Is how large scale and longer term geoengineering campaigns would affect the monsoon circulation. And I thought that was very nice written in actually in the Ministry for the Future, that well, it did of course cool the planet for a while, and we know that it does that because we have volcanic eruptions that are big, and so we've seen that in the history. And then they are sort of very our observations are not so great about the rainfall, and we just move on, and it was anyway too short an experiment to really tell. So I thought that was a very good way of describing sort of the state of knowledge about that. So it will have an effect, but I don't think that we know, and we can know at this point, or really what it will be. So it is absolutely no silver bullet, because while it will cool down the planet for as long as you do it for a bit, it has side effects. We do know that it has side effects, and it of course doesn't get us anywhere nearer to a solution, which would be not to emit greenhouse gases in the first place. And also all the other problems from the CO2 itself, ocean acidification and so on, are obviously. So it's I think it was the way, sort of as a panic reaction after a really deadly heat wave. It was sort of something that you could easily imagine might happen, but it's not a solution. But of course, there is not a solution to climate change. The only solution is not burning fossil fuels. But to achieve that, we need many solutions on many different levels. There is not the one thing that we have to do. And I think getting carbon out of the atmosphere is one aspect of it in almost all the sort of possible and plausible futures that scientists look at.
Can I just ask you, the questions are coming in thick and fast now, and we will get to your questions in just a second. I just want to pick up on one of the things there before, lest I forget it. Freddie, I mean, you're very concerned about I'm sure, Stan, you are as well, about the issues of justice and equity when we're talking about, dealing with climate change on a global level. And because, we're talking about monsoons, well, quite often they happen in South Asia. Not to say that everybody's poor in South Asia, but there's this huge population in South Asia, for instance, that, has trouble, has huge economic trouble. Do the solutions at the moment, or to what extent do the solutions at the moment help there? Are they diverse enough? Are we thinking diverse enough to pick up, both global solutions as well as very specific solutions that are specific to areas of the globe that need different attention?
Well, I don't think we are, because well, climate change is always discussed as well, the main focus of the discussion is on mitigation, on getting emissions down, and we need to get them to net zero CO2, and that is important. But of course, as I said, we have already changed the climate quite a lot, and so we need to also adapt to the climate and to the climate that we live in today. And for both things, the global north, the developed countries that have historically emitted a lot more, have to help the rest of the world to achieve that, to achieve a transition away from fossil fuels and to adaptation. And well, they have promised 100 billion a year to do that, and haven't even got that money together. So I think there's still a long way to go.
There's a chapter in Fredi's book that I found quite striking. It's short, but it's a kind of blow to the head that I've been pleased that the Paris Agreement insists on climate equity. And this was diplomats concerned about it working really hard to get it included in that document. So climate equity specifically states that the richer developed nations that have burned more carbon historically shall pay more to help out the poorer developing countries that haven't burned that much carbon in the past, but are maybe burning it now in order to develop and to bring their populations out of poverty. So the historical inequity of world history is now inscribed in the landscape, such that we need climate equity so that the richer nations, and it's a scheduled thing in the Paris Agreement, you have a list of richer nations and developing nations. I was thinking, well, that's comforting, but what Fredi's chapter pointed out was that loss and damage is a legal term that is completely vague and hasn't been defined in such a way. I mean, there are actually international treaties on it, so presumably they'll work it out, but it'll be a matter of legalisms and of a legal fight that'll come down to how much do I have to pay in order to conform with my promises made in the Paris Agreement. And there will be a lot of foot dragging and definition making and legal battles to pay as little as possible, when actually the need is huge. So there's two things I can see here happening, and some of it comes out of weather attribution. Can you do carbon pricing? Can you put a number for the reinsurance companies and the insurance companies on how much of this cost came from climate change itself that can be laid on the at the door of the developed nations that burn the most carbon, that they should pay for, that they have an obligation to, a legal obligation. And then the other thing is carbon quantitative easing. Can new money be made up by the central banks of the world that is dedicated to decarbonization work as the first use of that money? And my novel focuses on that as being a possible tool for us in the current political economic order, already existing order, so you don't have to invent something new. It already exists. Quantitative easing already exists as a method. If it were applied to the decarbonizing project, it might be one tool for us. And that too would require pricing and costing out, et cetera.
Look, I mean, this issue of equity and being fair, and maybe changing many systems, not just one system, from the ground up. We've seen that over the last, what is it, year and a half or what have you. And we do have a question here that sort of tries to bring those two things together here. I'm just going to read this off a bit cold here, but do you think there are lessons to learn from the rapid and focused COVID vaccine development for climate research to action? So, I mean, can we take inspiration? Can we take methods from what we've seen over the last year and a half? It almost seems as though we've dragged our heels, as you've said, over the last how many decades with climate. How come we can move so fast with a global pandemic?
Well, I think actually the global pandemic is a really bad example of what we should not do, because there are more people in poverty now than at the beginning of the pandemic, because the shutting down the economies and everything that has been done, so that those the poorest in all these economies are the ones who are worst off. Most of them have lost their jobs, or not most of them, but many of them have lost their jobs, and in particular things like when you actually have then an extreme weather event, then people can't be helped, because you have to have you have competing risks that you cannot evacuate people because you can't bring them together. Then you expose them to the pandemic, but you have to evacuate them because you expose them to a hurricane. So I think it has been a huge example of what complex or compounding risks are, and how not, in many cases, how not to deal with them, because it has created a lot more poverty in globally than we had at the beginning of the pandemic.
Also, in the way that vaccines are being rolled out and
yes,
not reached everybody. Yeah.
One thing that occurs to me, however, is that the pandemic taught us that the scientific community, faced with a crisis like this new viral disease, rallied, worked cooperatively across the globe, worked up the vaccines with remarkable rapidity. But then the regulatory bodies of the world, FDA in the United States, I've heard it said that the vaccines were ready to go a couple of months after the virus showed up, but that it took another 10 months or so to get the approvals to get these shots into people. And so this relates to what Fredi's project has been, speeding up the rate at which science gets applied. By that might be applicable to, so weather attribution, you can tell very quickly how much climate change was involved in any extreme weather event. You get something like the pandemic, you have a cure, but you have to go through a slow and cumbersome process to actually get it into people. Are there ways to speed up science in emergencies? And so weather attribution shows some ways that it sort of can be done. And so in the pandemic, we saw good examples and bad examples of human response in that. And I think there's lessons all over the place, both things that we can copy from the pandemic to climate change, and things that we should learn from and do different things.
I want to just say that question was from Christopher Lyon, or Lyon. Thank you very much to you. Perhaps before we go on, I want to actually pick up on one or two things that you just said there, but I'll mention two more questions here. First of all, in response to geoengineering, Justin Case comes back and says that Greg Benford withdrew his proposal to place a mirror in the Lagrange point between the Earth and the Sun to reflect sunlight because, as he said, the idea provided an excuse to continue greenhouse gas emission. Perhaps, Stan, in a moment, you can give us a comment on that, whether you think that's true or not. And also here from Flavia Fisher, climate science and climate fiction use a lot of fear in their narratives. Might this turn people off to take real action? Do we have to chance, or sorry, do we have to change the narrative? It should stay here. Perhaps, Stan, maybe you could refer to the Benford comment there. Is that true? How do you feel about that?
Well, it's possible that certain geoengineering solutions put us in a permanently vulnerable position, and that they would have to be continued forever, or else we'd get a pulse of heat, and also open to sabotage. So that particular notion that Benford got out of the literature is one that he's right to be denouncing later. He and I come from opposite wings of American science fiction, and we've often disagreed intensely about various political things. But at the World Science Fiction Convention in Anaheim in 2006, we did an event together to talk to the science fiction crowd, which prides themselves on being skeptical, and this included a lot of climate skeptics. And we did a climate change presentation together, which was like, I don't know, some kind of people from opposite wing of the political parties in Europe, whatever, getting together to speak in concert. And we did a good performance of him, the scientist, me, the English major, saying climate change had to be taken seriously to a science fiction audience that wasn't yet taking it seriously. So we've done that kind of project together. And I'm always interested in his thinking, let's put it that way.
I think, can I, you're muted, Zulfikar, but I'll just answer your question.
Always the true professional, unmuted. There you go.
Because science is not using fear at all. I think it's sometimes what happens with the scientific results that are then used as there's a lot of doom mongering. I would totally agree, but it's not coming from the science community. So if you read the IPCC report, the summary for policymakers, which is not terribly long, there are bad news, of course, because we already have 1.2 degree of global warming, so climate change is a fact, and so on. But there are also good news. There are good news that when we actually reach net zero, temperatures will stop rising. So we don't have a problem that we don't know from a scientific point what to do. We have known for a very long time what we need to do, not burning fossil fuels. And while that is for some technologies that are important for the global community, like flying, difficult to do, we also know how to do that and how to not use fossil fuels to heat houses, to have transport systems and so on. We are still not doing it, but that's not a scientific problem. That's not that the science is not there. It's that the political and the societal things that need to come together for that to happen are not happening. So I think that's very important to so it's not that we need to develop a vaccine, because we know to a very large degree what we need to do. We need to do it.
I'm concerned that perhaps a lot of the fear is actually in the general media. So it's not fiction writers or scientists. It's us lot, isn't it? Who need a headline that gets clicked above all others, and we ham it up.
Yeah.
So do you think, does that turn people off? Does that make people go, I'm not going to look for the positive here. If I just do something that we may change, I'll just go, oh, I'm scared. And, we're all doomed anyway. I mean, are we to blame, the media? Quite seriously, it's not a trick question.
Well, I think the media has definitely done or is doing a lot of things wrong. And I thought we actually had moved the global, or at least in Europe, in particular in Germany, where there was just elections. So I was watching the media quite closely. Before the immediate election campaign, there were a lot of very accurate and very good reporting on climate change, on what the problems are, what we need to do, and so on. As soon as the election campaign started, the high profile media questions were, oh, what will petrol cost? Which is, it's sort of, oh my God, we have been back. We transported ourselves back to the 20th century. And I think that is a problem. and that has meant that the debate about climate change and the solutions and so on have not been an important part of the campaign of the election, as important as it should have been and could have been. But yeah, of course, it's not. The media is also not the only ones who are acting in this space.
But I will say the media, I'm thinking about this. It's an interesting question. The drive there is to get clicks. So you need sensationalist, you need clickbait. So this would be in the 20th century, what sells newspapers? So controversy, fear, sensationalism, and exaggeration. So in a way, it just mirrors society's own desires and trying to match to the desires of the readers, of the viewers. What do they want? Let's give them that. So does the media have another role? Should they be guiding, or are they just a mirror? And if they're a mirror, are they a distorting mirror? These are interesting questions. But I'm thinking if mainstream media always said, well, if you want to do something about this, there's a mass demonstration down at the public square that's going to happen at 9 a.m. on Friday. You should go to that if you are concerned about this issue. There's never activist suggestions in mainstream media, so they rest content to have gotten attention and to be a kind of a mirror, but they don't prod or push. They're not activists. There isn't. Mainstream media means precisely non-activist media. So if that could be changed, that would be interesting.
But it's a bit of a it's I can't say the word that was on the tip of my tongue. It's BS, isn't it, to suggest that any human, when picking a story narrative for a science fiction book or some other book, or scientists say, this is what I find interesting, and this is what I think I can get funding for this, so I'm going to follow that up, or we as writers, journalists, write whatever we want. I mean, we're always selecting the best picture, the best headline, the facts that we talk to, even if it's conscious or not conscious, the people we choose to speak to. For instance, you two, I mean, why, what if we swapped you out with different people, different constellations? What sort of conversation would there be? And I mean, to sort of like to tie that rather than just rant on, it's sort of like some people are chatting amongst themselves, talking about a lack of trust. I mean, it says here lack of trust in science, but I mean, is there a trust in social discourse where perhaps, a closer meeting of minds between, say, you, a fiction writer, you, a climate scientist, and perhaps, well, actually the journalists, we don't just report the facts, we mess them up. So, what can be done better there in order to basically take the science from science into application? Was my microphone off again?
No,
no, it's a difficult question.
Yeah, for me, my project has been to try to turn science into stories that are still entertaining, and it's a problem of craft. The novel is designed to express the individual subjectivity of middle class or bourgeois citizens. That was how it was born in the 19th century. It isn't super well designed for expressing what scientists do or expressing world historical crises, but it's a capacious and flexible form, and I've been trying to put it to use. I sort of feel that as an English major, but married to a scientist, and that I'm a kind of science patriot. And it's a little simplistic to put it that way, but it certainly has given me new stories to tell, and they're interesting, and they might be useful. So my project is clear. I don't know how Fredi feels about it.
Well, I think actually we all, to different degrees, have to be entertaining at some point. So I think students always ask, what do you need to do to become a successful scientist? And I think, well, of course, analytical skills and stuff is important. What makes you successful is that you can design your experiments and write up your results so that it actually shows what questions they answer and why it's interesting and for whom it's interesting and why it's useful. and of course you still have the facts, and sometimes your results are kind of, well, what we thought might be useful turns out is really not, but still the telling the story around it is important, so that you get the other scientists to read what you do, and then you can play part of this. Only then you are part of the scientific community. If you can't do that, if you can't tell what you do in a way that is transparent and interesting, then you're not a successful scientist. Then you don't publish stuff, and then you're not read, and then you're not part of it. And I think in the same way, that's what of course what a fiction writer has to do, and a journalist also. So it's a journalist don't have to be activists to write about climate change in a way that gets people maybe to act, but you also have this, okay, as you said, what people do I talk to? How do I write the story? I think this, to some degree, we all have to be entertaining, as even if that might sound a bit disheartening, that scientists have to be entertaining. At least they need to entertain other scientists.
Well, I agree with you completely. I remember the reaction I got at some pharmaceutical event when I said that journalism is entertainment. But I won't go into that right now, because I wanted to pick up on something here. Christopher Lyon is actually from McGill University in Canada. He's coming again because this is something that we've been talking about. How far can you go, like, from your base point? Can you become political? I mean, you've both used the word activism or activist almost, and every time I hear that word, it's sort of like it's a dirty word. Sort of the bell goes off. Not that I think it's a dirty word, but there is that sort of idea out there in society. And Christopher is saying here there's a disagreement even among scientists about the role of science or scientists in society. And so, is that where people like Greta Thunberg help you out, sort of like a conduit? Can you use Greta Thunberg in a sense to sort of like, to apply things, and you can sort of stand behind them, or is the fiction, does that allow you to come out from behind the curtain, as it were, in order to get more action and more things done? If we do know what we need to do in order to solve this crisis, stop burning fossil fuels. Sounds incredibly simple, by the way. I should make that a headline one day.
For me, it's a problem of trying to do political art without being too heavy-handed, without making my characters into obvious puppets, with making a story that's interesting enough that people who might not agree with my politics might still enjoy the story, and then be subtly persuaded or having their mind open in that direction. So it's a question of balance between my own politics and my desire as an artist to do a novel that would stand as a novel. But novels are inherently political, so it's not like it's a contradiction. It's just a question of balance.
Yeah, and I think for a scientist, well, there is always this idea that you have to be neutral or objective, and well, you can't be objective. That's just impossible. But of course, I think the most important thing for a scientist is to be transparent, for your science to be transparent, for it to be absolutely clear. What are the questions you ask? What are the methods? What is the data to make it all publicly available? And this is sort of what we are doing in the cases when we don't do peer review as well, that every data set, everything is available, so everyone can come and redo what we did. So and of course that's absolutely crucial. But I think as a scientist, you are allowed, and I think actually as part of society, and as someone who also has an audience, I feel it's a duty to interpret what your results mean for the society you live in, and so I don't think that an activist is a dirty word at all, because, well, what would be the opposite? But what would be the alternative? Passive, just saying,
Activist.
here is a paper. have fun.
Yeah.
It's too important a problem for that, and I'm too invested in wanting to live in a more equal and more just society than doing that. I think
well,
it's
we could just leave the
definitely
planet, though, couldn't we? We could just leave the planet, go to a different planet.
I quite like Earth. Thank you very much.
There is
Sorry,
no planet B.
There's Mars, though.
No, there is no. Let's not go there. There is no planet B.
No, fair enough. Look, I'm sorry to interrupt. The reason I interrupted was actually a bit more strategic than that. We're coming up against the clock, and I just wanted to sort of throw in one last sort of idea here. This, the idea of messages getting reduced in a sense in order to sell them easier. So fiction has its tools, and science. I mean, Freddie, you were saying, you have to be entertaining. You want scientists to read you, to cite you, to get out there. And when you talk, you're very, just talking normally. There's no jargon whatsoever, right? It's wonderful. But I've been listening to some of the conversations over the last couple of weeks in the UK. I admit to being from the UK, with the the CO2 shortages. And I mean, I might just be a typical ignoramus, but for decades now, we've been told and sort of taught to think of CO2 as only waste. And then in the media, people start talking about all the things we need it for. And I wonder, why does that happen? And how can we have reduced the argument so much to a point of like, it's only bad. There's no sort of like, if you want beer, you're going to need some CO2, right? How do we get around that problem? It's a bit reductive, isn't it? But I mean, my question is reductive as well, asking about reduced comments. But it just struck me as being quite fascinating. What would you say? Can the public take more? I mean, in a sense, my question is, we're talking about what can fiction writers do, what can scientists do to reach the public more, what can politicians do, but what about the public? What can we do? Can we step up more? Do we have to engage more with science to actually be a little bit more jargon friendly, learn a bit more, invest a bit more time in understanding what it means?
Well,
Can I recommend?
Go ahead.
I can recommend that everybody just take the free daily email from Nature Briefing, the free daily email from the Society of Environmental Journalists. It's not a problem to be a citizen scientist or just to be a scientifically literate citizen today. So, I mean, really, CO2, it's a chemical. We need to take gigatons of it out of the atmosphere. It's not lacking. The problem is that the example is so silly that it obscures a more serious difficulty, which is that scientific literacy takes some time and effort, but not very much. So people should definitely put in that time and effort.
Yes, and I think I have nothing frustrates me more than people who sort of find it's acceptable to, oh, I was so bad at math. That's something that everyone can say, and it's totally fine. No one can say, oh, I can't write a sentence. That's not something that anyone would say in the same thing. And it's not so hard. And it's also, people are usually, when you explain scientific things, people understand them. Most people are not that stupid. And I think, so we shouldn't treat them as stupid, and they shouldn't definitely not treat themselves as stupid. So every time you say the word math, that people just shut down. I think that is definitely a problem.
But not one we can't fix. We're staying on the positive here as we enter into the final minute. I will say again, mea culpa, I have been told by a Nobel laureate that I'm an idiot and that I ask stupid questions. I hope tonight hasn't been too bad. I wanted to just scroll my little page here because we've actually basically covered everything. And it seems to be, judging from all the comments that we've brought together, lots of people in the audience who are researchers and novelists in their own rights, and they're, been really interested in what you've been saying. So I want to thank you both for having joined us. Friederike, Fredi, Otto, and Kim Stanley Robinson, You've been absolutely fantastic in this conversation here. Give you a virtual hand clap. I won't clap now because it will just reverberate around this room here, you know. But if we could, we would. So thank you so much for being here. I also want to say thanks to our hosts and event organizers, Klimakrise, especially Editor-in-Chief Caro Morn and the Project Officer Eva Freindorfer. This event was brought to you by Klimakrise with support from DW, Deutsche Welle in Germany, and New Statesman in the UK. There'll be a full recording of the conversation on Klimakrise's YouTube channel in case you missed any of it or want to watch the whole thing again. And I certainly will be watching it again. Before we go, Stan and Fredi, any final words of encouragement, positive vibes you want to send out into the world?
I think we have it all in our hands to solve this problem and to make this to turn this actually into an opportunity to achieve more equity and justice. It's not, we are absolutely not doomed. So yeah, I think you were saying we should stay on the positive, but I think we have all reason to be, but we have to act.
Excellent stuff.
I'd say just keep pressing across the board, everybody. Press your political representatives to represent you in this affair properly. That kind of pressure will help. And yes, I would echo what Fredi says. We've got the solutions, we have to enact them. That's not easy, but it is the project of our time, so it might get done.
Might get done. Stan, that's...
So the best we can say.
You failed the brief, Stan, but anyway, we're going to take that. Thank you so much. You're supposed to be fully positive, as I'm trying to be right now. Yeah. Thank you both. No, it's been great talking to you. And I hope that maybe we might see a project emerging in the future between the two of you, Stan Robinson and Fredi Otto. Thank you so much for being with us. Thanks again to our audience. You've been wonderful. All your engagement here. I've been looking over to the other side, my second screen here. You've been fantastic. So thanks for watching. Thanks for your engagement. Until next time, take care. Goodbye.